All right. I remember when one point as a student of Gamel's, he made a comment that, as much as he also says good, you know, impressive things about Paxton's drawing, he said he quoted Paxton saying, "I can draw as accurately as anyone, but I'm no draftsman." I haven't heard that from other Gamel students. Usually, what you get is that people will tell you he's a great draftsman, but it's a very interesting question what we're dealing with the question of draftsmanship. And but that's only going to be the second point. David, my friend David Johnson, there it is, David J, has sent a question in and made a point. And most of his points I don't even, and this one here I don't really disagree with either, except for one little old thing, and I blued it out here in the video and so I'll read through it. You can take note of the part where it's blued out. But I just want to let this be the introduction to a discussion about certain kinds of lines that you find on drawings. And then I'm going to talk about in general about draftsmanship, because the question was brought up in relation to Brackman in the previous, in that video, the Brackman and the Boston School video. This is about the this one is referring to the early Marx video, just a few back, maybe 325 or something. I appreciate Unknown's question and your answer, especially considering how the finish is in the start. Two things observed here follow this theme of construction drawing versus visual impression. From my experience, construction drawing simply takes your invisible angles and renders them as a tool to draw against. In other words, makes them visible. That's me talking. Look at the Degas nude you were referencing, and we're going to do that. He's rendered at least 3 vertical plumb lines that the curved arabesque is visually measured from. The hard straight line is like a horizon line to the hills of curving anatomy. Construction drawing creates a type of armature to work against. Now, all that is agreed, right? Well, I say that last part we all agree on. That's the typical mindset. I'd say the major drawback in the construction method is having that crutch to compare to while the angle is literally invisible. It's the invisible angle one must learn to see as represented by a serpentine set of gestural curves. This appears to be a mindset issue more than anything. This is about the artist's state of mind while observing, then applying marks in a calibrated way. The more you work this mental exercise, like playing a musical instrument, the more accurate you become. Hard work pays off, hard work that can't be avoided if mastery is the goal. David, thank you, David. We agree on everything, but I do want to look at except for those marks on that Degas. It would be a point I'd make to you in person if you were standing here, and I appreciate you're putting that out there. But everything you've said, we agree on. And one of the things I'm talking about with the construction method is this loss of neural energy and the idea that you're going to get eventually to the shape you're looking for. Whereas the other way of drawing with the look of nature, you are always working with the shape. So the shape gets to be reinvented and remolded and rethought over and over again so as I say, in opposition to the you sort of peck and peck and peck and peck and gets finer and finer and finally you're done, but you've had no chance to really revisit it in a great ways unless you're drawing a longer line. So in a continuum, in a continuous rehearsal, and a continuous revisitation of of the real shapes of the real look of nature. So I think that's one of the great ones. And the other one is, of course, that you you run out of energy to do that, even if you could in the construction model. By the way, to the degree that a construction drawing model eventually, till that person gets to the point where he can see his lines, and we'll start now drawing with the big shape and adjusting big shapes against each other, then that just tells you he's in a mixed world, eventually allowing that my world is the one that's going to own the place at the end, drawing what you see and letting it interplay with what else you see as opposed to these construction things. So you all understand that's all preliminary and that sort of thing. But this is Degas nude. Let's look at this thing. So here it is on the right. And you can easily see, well, maybe you can't with some of your small phones, but you should be able to see a line here, a vertical line here, vertical line at the back here, and another thin vertical line right up through some interesting points right in through here. And it's a fascinating thing. I mean, now those things are typically on the outer side of, on the underside if they're used for drawing, so they wouldn't be visible over the top. And in this case, you can't tell if they are or not. It looks like they're under it, possibly. Whereas with the but I'm going to show you some other drawings where it's not, like this one here. See these lines on here? These are lines, these grids. He doesn't draw with a grid in front of him. He doesn't suspend his shapes through the grid. He doesn't mark them through the grid and use the grid in any way to draw from. But someone could conclude that in any of these cases. I've noticed that both Bouguereau and Leighton trace their drawings and then put these crossbars on them if they're going to grid them up. Degas doesn't do that. He doesn't seem to have any concern about it. He takes his actual drawing and then he grids it up. Draws lines right on the face of the drawing itself. So that's a more of a use-oriented model too, or another version of that use model. But notice that the squares, and they don't all have to be square, but these squares created by the horizontal and verticals are going to be on a paper somewhere, and then they're going to be transferred, and then your drawing will be slotted into those. It's sort of an efficiency model, and that's what you see in all three of these drawings. These are just gridded up for the purposes of copying, presumably. Okay, so now is that not the case in this one here? I can't tell you for sure, but I don't see evidence of vertical lines in any of Degas' drawings like this. So I'm assuming that he actually is drawing these, he's gridding these up. And this is his early work as a gridmeister, and he's doing this stuff. He might be new to the game slightly, but so to whatever extent these lines would have been here, he would have put the same lines, he would use the same lines out here, measured exactly the same, the heights being the same and all that sort of stuff. He would have had these three lines out here. One of which, as you can see, goes through some very good, consistent points right through here. One of them marks the head, et cetera, et cetera. One of them marks the farthest out point. Now, these could have been lines that were used for memory drawing even. But I don't have any suspicion that that's the case. I'm just telling you that typically, I doubt that he used these for drawing. I don't see any evidence that Degas typically used vertical lines and drew them into a drawing and then used them in some referential way. I do know that it's not a crazy thing to have a vertical line near you. I always talk to the student and I say, be aware of the left edge of your paper. That's your vertical. And every one of your angles has to be seen to that. That's the way it's going to hang. It's going to hang on the wall, framed that way. But this is actually vertical. And when you have it sitting on your easel, make sure you have your drawing set up so it's vertical. That side is a vertical. It's a plumb. It's your plumb. But there it is sitting there right on the paper for you to refer to. All the more reason you don't need all these vertical lines all through the drawing, because you can see the play here. But I agree with you, David, that those lines are, sometimes if you have a straight line, it's easy to see the fullness of a bump, for example. I suggest that people become aware of the straight line that goes through here and see how much pie this thing is, this tray is filled with. See how thick see how fat that full that pie crust is. You imagine me drawing a vertical from here to here, and then you can look at that out of the corner of your eye and ask yourself if that feels like the right width to length and the right tilt, as it were an ovoid, as we speak about it. So in any case, this is one of his early paintings. Some of his most beautiful drawings are from this painting, Rape of the Something or Others. I don't honestly remember the name of the picture. So you'll see other people. You see him here. He's doing it obviously very, very specifically. This is the drawing I think I showed a minute ago. Is it the one? Or maybe not. Anyway, here's the painting. So while this whole thing was blank, there would have been some grid work somewhere on here for him, and he would have used that to transfer a tracing onto the canvas. At which point he'll do whatever he does, lay in the figure, lay in the background. But that gives you an idea of what these vertical lines are for. So I just didn't want anybody to be confused thinking that virtually any of these guys, if you see grid lines, you're probably talking about transference lines. That's what they're for. So I'll just leave it at that. I think I can leave it at that. Here's Puvis de Chavannes, the mural painter, and here you see those same lines. He's not using these to help him draw the figure. He's using them to to transfer the drawing that he already has, to trace it, as it were, onto the mural canvas. By the way, this is for enlarging paintings, right? So this is a little drawing, could be any size. Michelangelo's frequently aren't much more than 6 inches high. If you haven't seen them, you really ought to go to the Gardner Museum at some point and find that little door full of his drawings. It's really quite a delight, and very, very memorable in the sense of how, you're actually making contact with Michelangelo there, which is fairly hard to do in this country, except for through drawings. That one of them, of course, being one of the great drawings that he ever produced, which I'm going to be talking about in a minute. But these then so that's what the reason for the grid was. You can make that grid, so if your figure needs to be 6 times bigger, you just make the square 6 times bigger. You know what I mean? So if you're drawing 6 inches high, but it needs to be 36 inches high, you put this grid out there, and then you have the proportions, the basic proportions, and certain points that go through these certain points that hit on the drawing that are on that grid that you can use for reference to get the drawing established in an efficient way, which is really, it's about efficiencies. I know I have the expectation that there are some painters who don't do this as much as they take the drawing and redraw it up there, but depending on the size and how far back you can get and all those things, you could wind up with every kind of trouble. Been a big, long discussion, mural transference. But then the second question is where I'm going to spend most of the day today, and that is, this is Doug M., and he says, the comparison of Brackman's work to that of the Boston School artist was truly enlightening. It crystallized for me the unity that the Impressionist method brings to painting. Many thanks. But one question, you said that Degas was obviously a better draftsman than Brackman. It wasn't obvious to me. I'm often at a loss when these kinds of assessments are pointed out. Can you explain what you are seeing that brings you to that conclusion? So I'm actually not going to bring Brackman into this. You can see problems with Brackman, but if you think about what I'm about to tell you with relation to this question of what draftsmanship actually is, or what great draftsmanship is, might be more to the point, by the way. Draftsmanship is just drawing, right? But when we talk draftsmanship, it's like talking horsemanship, right? It implies a skill, a special skill. And so what are the points related to those skills? I'll just go through a little list here, and then we're going to look at pictures, okay? By the way, so this is the convention of line drawing. This is all we're talking about right now, except at the very last slides, is line drawing. And line drawing is just a conventional way of getting the figure out there, to get an object drawn. And there are variations in how it's done, but convention just means an accepted way of doing things, right? And there are a lot of conventions in painting, especially in the longer history, the stuff that was going on around Giorgione and Titian and Bellini and all sorts of the Perugino. There was any number of conventions, like doing drawings and tracing them onto the panel, and those sorts of things. There's a conventional handling, right? Just a commonly accepted one. So line drawing, the way you see it here, is a commonly accepted form of making a thing, an object, of drawing an object, of making an object. I shouldn't be saying it that way. I shouldn't be saying making an object, but I mean it as opposed to making a visual impression. So these are some of the questions I might put to you about draftsmanship, or put it to you as statements and let you wander about with this. This isn't a conclusive thing for me or for anybody, but when you read the writings of good painters, and they talk about draftsmanship, there are these implied somethings, right? And again, I don't want to say for whatever reason, what's his name, Deliqua, was considered a great draftsman by almost everybody alive in his day. And you look at his drawings and you think, what is draftsmanship? Then everybody looks at Michelangelo and says, one of the great draftsmen of all time. So what a difference, though. And there are two different things happening, many different things. But then you get to Degas, and Degas isn't doing what they're doing. He's not making up figures. So drawing from life, so there's a draftsmanship there. So if you're aware that some of these figures are being made up in your head, and draftsmanship implies certain things, what would they be? So I'm just going to run through stuff that applies, I think, to virtually everything that has to do with draftsmanship, and let just be the beginning, if you like, of you sorting it out for yourself. The reason I say actions plus results is because there's a certain expectation that you're able to handle drawing in an efficient way, in a bold way, and all those things. I'll talk about these things in a minute, with certain qualities. And then at the end of the day, you'll have certain expectations. As I say, you'll have unity in the drawing, for example. So that's the way I'm treating this. So what are your actions like? Drawing has this implicitly that you need to act in a certain way. In other words, you have to have a moving brush, a point, right? You have to actually get things talking to each other. So these are acts of correlating phenomena in space. But in the end, though, however you do it, by the way, actions might be just being a stickler and just going around picking and picking and picking and picking at things. But you may find that that's not one of those things that fits into the draftsmanship model, right? When we talk about great draftsmanship. So think about that. What do you expect, in a sense, a draftsman to look like? Does it have to do with what Sorolla said? If I couldn't paint fast, I couldn't paint at all. Or are there other kinds of actions that are explicit in there that you expect to see in a draftsman? But in any case, efficiency is definitely one of them. You expect them to get in and get out, right? To say what they mean, etc. So let's just walk through them. So efficiency, that's when you look at a drawing, you expect it to look like it wasn't done with 1,000 touches and chored. Sorry, down below I talk about not labored. It will look easy. It'll look bold. There will be a certain boldness in the actions of the painter. There has to be a certain boldness in his mentality. You have to be able to let your arm put out a line, as opposed to being careful and that you'll have to be able to do that. You'll see the need for that in drawings coming up. But by the way, I put these to you as questions. Is it not so, right? But I expect to see grace and beauty in the lines, in the shape making, in the relationships, in the forms. I expect that. I expect the thing to be hanging together, really be unified. I expect that of good draftsmanship. I expect it to look simple, as I said before. I expect it to look plausible, especially if it's made up out of your head, and truthful, even if it's not made up, so truthful. But when you're painting from life, you're not looking to have it look plausible. You're expecting it to look truthful. That's my view. And so there might be a slightly different weight, a burden on a guy like Degas painting those figures from life and calling his draftsmanship. And by the way, looking at his early stuff and saying, but that really isn't draftsmanship yet. That's worth your time to look at by those very early drawings that he did, I think, in Rome with some of his friends over there. But when you're making a figure up in your head, though, you expect it to be plausible in form, to be plausible in proportions, to be plausible in gesture, and so on, right? That's a thing you're going to have to accept, but truthful. That's all. You don't quite have that same measuring tool at that point, because you're not using a model in the same way. Millet says he never worked from a model, but he did work from memory. So there's an element of truthfulness that would be there. Plausibility, though, is probably the key word in that way of working. I'll talk about these with pictures. But it should look easy. It shouldn't look labored. That's an expectation of draftsmanship. It contains the essentials. It gets to the essentials and doesn't go past that. There's a certain brevity. The significant line down below, you're after the things that are really important, and you're in and you're out. That's typical of draftsmanship, of what we think of as high draftsmanship. You'll see it in all the drawings I show you. And by the way, I didn't pick these with this list in mind. I was picking them just based on what drawings impressed me. So, but there's a purposefulness in the lines, sense of purpose, and they are direct and to the point. they'll typically be full of life, and they'll be expressive of something, right? It could be expressive of a mood. But there'll be a unity of expression, right? But they will be expressive. They won't be weak in that, and tentative, and look like they're carefully made, and it looks like the model's standing there. It's going to be, draftsmanship presumes that this person has brought the unity of the draftsman-like idea, the shape of the person, is fully expressive of the form, fully expressive of the gesture, the storytelling, the narrative, the gesture that makes up the narrative. But yeah, so full of life. So these are the things that I think of as in the class of things that you might find a dozen more or more. I don't mean to be definitive, and I don't mean to make this into a lesson. I'm just trying to get you to look at, which is I think I really mostly want you to do. Just look at drawings and use your own judgment about what's a great drawing. And a lot of what we're talking about in draftsmanship, the idea is to get in there and make your point and do it very effectively and very well. Most of the drawings you're going to look at here are drawings done for pictures. So there's some sort of transference that goes on. The one on the right is the Libyan Sibyl. You know that from the Sistine Chapel. One of the most beautiful pieces out there is that figure, and beautifully simplified, I guess you'd say, in the painting. Of course, it's draped and so on, but I don't know if there's any drawing that I don't. There's any painter whose drawings I don't put first on the list before Michelangelo, and before in particular this drawing. The one on the left, of course, has this tremendous sense of big forms, and so there's that about it. Form being one of those dramatically purposeful things. What did Degas say? Drawing is the interpretation of form. So form has these components. They'll have to do with the articulation of the silhouette, and they'll have to do with the rolling of the bumps, meaning that kind of form. But drawing is the what happens between the contours. Well, this is a nice example of that forminess that happens between the outlines. And Degas is a wonderful other example of that. By the way, these drawings both have beautiful, what I call touch. They have an aesthetic in their mark making. Control is a thing you expect to see. You don't see people trying to figure out. That's why when you're a young student, you're making your marks, and they're off-putting even to you. And that's why you might go and copy somebody to see what the marks look like and how much control they're bringing to these marks. Look at the beauty of a line that continues down through like that, just along this foot here, and so on. But yeah, there's remarkable beauty. There's also a unity. This is very, very, very busy, the walnut sack, but it does still manage to hang together visually as a drawing. It hangs together even though it's overstated in its detail, or hyper busy, overstated in the sense of many little things at the expense of some big ones. Just the opposite of what this is doing. But still, a drawing will hang together. That's one of those things I would tell you, that's the unity question. The drawing in itself hangs together. It has this intrinsic oneness within itself. And when these two are together, the whole thing should have that as a drawing form. As a drawing, all the elements of this thing are there for it to be a unified thing, a unified painting thing. Now, of course, who can look at Leonardo and not consider him right there? Most people put him first. There's no reason in my mind to have a war over this stuff. But he is that first guy who's really, you might say, truly an impressionist. These things here really, this one here really delivers that idea of him painting with the nuanced look, the pursuit of the nuanced look of nature as it appears, and not some statement. Michelangelo's obviously feels much more like a power statement or something like that in both cases. The left one, of course, reminds you of Rubens. But then again, look at the beautiful unity of this drawing. This is obviously made out of his head horse. And to whatever extent it is, I don't know the extent to which guys like him are using clay figures or anything like that. But nevertheless, this has so much of those qualities: beautiful line, beautiful shape articulation, and to the extent this is made up out of his head. And there's a number of his, like the bear, that are flawed in their in their shape making, but they're still beautiful as drawings, the way they hang together. But draftsmanship, you see, this has a great sense of form. It has a great sense of the shapes are right in relation to each other. The guy sits on the horse far enough back. All those sorts of things you would connect with somebody who has skills. So the implicit skills, a good draftsman won't stop his drawing, and I mean, unless he's got something he needs before this element is correct, but he will be trying to have everything in unity. I'm talking about everything in their relationships as objects in relation to each other, as well as interesting shapes. And this one really does have some fun shape making. It's beautiful the way this horse's head turns, and the way, just exactly where it hits in relation to this figure is really, really aesthetically promising. So Raphael, the divine Raphael, right, was considered a great draftsman. But even he looks like he's doing a little bit like Michelangelo. He's pecking at 1,000 little things and trying to put it together from anatomy. These things, this one looks like it was done possibly from a model. So it's an interesting combination that he's putting in here. But I suggest that, as young as he was, it's possible that Degas, and which this one, by the way, reminds me much more of a Degas, that they were similar in age when they were reaching when they were maxing out with doing the very best with their skills in drawing. But he's the other one that's considered in that era to be a great draftsman. You step a little bit further down and you have what happens with Rubens, and he's actually using the chalk in a heavier way. And it doesn't rely, as you can see, so much on line and a mass as an afterthought, but he actually brings in mass and really powerfully expresses form. So this is really a sample of great draftsmanship in the sense of great form, great expression of form, and the great unity combination. And these things, my guess is both these were probably done from life. People try to think that he made these things up. I know that he makes up figures at times, but I think he's always bringing models in. As Gamel would point out to you, the shadow line here, you can't make this stuff up, the kinds of bumps you see here. You wouldn't begin to put all these things in or whatever if you didn't have something in the reflected lights and all that stuff. You can't make that stuff up. You wouldn't be able to do it. So these are undoubtedly done from life. Very powerfully expressed forms. I don't know if anybody ever expressed, apart from Michelangelo, ever expressed forms any more powerfully than this, and with a remarkable simplicity, for all that, a real sense of reserve, Beautiful articulation of contour, the shape making is here. Of course, one of the things you expect is for the figure to have good proportions if you're a good draftsman. Doesn't mean it's always absolutely the case in all your drawings for sure, but I actually suggest another approach to this too, as you well know, and that is that you take the mindset of what are the great drawings of all time and build your skills on the basis of what are the qualities I'd like to incorporate into me, the draftsman. And so you can see things, as Degas say, you can learn something from anyone. Well, I don't learn from anyone. Gamel said if you're going to borrow from a millionaire. It means borrow from the greats. So we're talking about Rubens being one of those guys. If you see something about his work here that has that quality that you need, you might say it's somewhere between simplicity and just greatness of form. You can talk about other things as well. These are wonderful gestures and so on. But have that in mind. What are the great drawings of all time rather than who are the great draftsmen? Fascinating question. And if you, as I've said before, if you take a bunch of pictures trying to figure out composition, get a bunch of postcards, 10, 20 postcards, and then and you have your very favorite compositions. And as you find new postcards or see new pictures, bring them to that group of 20 cards and put them in there and see if it's better than the ones you've got and start discarding them. I suggest you do the same thing find 20 great drawings and then see if you can improve on them, improve on your package. You'll be doing great service to yourself and to any student you might ever have to have done that research for yourself. So here in the same mentality of great forms, this is Rubens-like, but this is Millet, and Millet is the guy who painted, he said, only from memory. But he was a looker. I mean, I say he had his eyes open all the time. And there are things, for example, when he wanted to have some drapery, on a female figure, sometimes he would have his wife wear her dress for several days in a row until it took on her form, significantly took on her form, and he would be memorizing it, and he wouldn't be drawing from life. He said he didn't know how to draw from life. It's just an interesting point. Read Julia Cartwright on. She has, I think hers is the best collection of quotes anywhere, and it has his story to go with it. But this is the same thing. No, this drawing is more peremptory, especially the one on the left, more Claudette. I'm lost my location here, and so on. So it's not as elegant in one sense, but it's still every bit as unified, every bit as expressive of form. And there's that mood of the crying person. He figured the whole figure had to do the story, not some expression on the face like a tear in the eye, but the whole body had to be in some sort of a telling the story, right? And you wanted to see it in the body, not in the rest of the story. So all these figures that you're seeing him making are dramatically, gesturally empowered, right? And that's his thing. Every time you see a little guy like this, and you'll see the same thing in Daumier, and at times in Degas, but in those two guys in particular, I think I'll show you one of his. I meant to do, where I meant to be, okay. I think Ang was actually older than, I know he was, than Millet. I meant to do these in chronological order. So this is Ang and What's Not to Love. This is the same thing, actually. Isn't this a Rubens? Isn't this the great forms? By the way, Rubens is rather the culmination, the absorbing of all these things, and then the filtering down into a simpler, his own version of what drawing ought to be, right? And he really does become much more summary and more capable. The hyperbole, so to speak, in some of his work makes him difficult for me to keep him at the top end. But draftsmanship is just draftsmanship, and actually it's a point I probably shouldn't bring up at all. This is drawn from life. These are drawn from life. So in the sense that we're moving toward what Degas is doing, these are all drawn from life. These pencil drawings, these pencil portraits are quite astonishing. You have to look at them, but to the extent they're on tracing paper, that might explain some of this line work on the drapery, but I think he worked that way anyway. I don't think he needed tracing paper to do that, but that's where you have to do further investigating for yourself. But you see how well articulated the shapes are with just lines, all through the whole figure. Of course, he's got a great sense of form, etc. Wish this one were a little bit more readable. I couldn't find a better one. It's one of my favorites too, so I get a little stubborn, I guess. But yeah, so this is as beautiful as drawing gets. And again, he's one of the great draftsmen of all time. He's considered that in the pantheon, and I say considered that. Who's talking, right? We're talking what painters say. I meant to leave one of these off here because I've already been looking at this one. But this is a Degas for a different picture done about the same time. These are imaginative paintings he was doing in his youth. I don't know if any of them were ultimately completed as he switched off and began doing other things. But both of these give you that sense of efficiency, that sense of getting right to the point. He's got a fantastic simplicity to his work that just makes you feel like you're standing in front of nature. And like he's just a brilliant eyeball. But the efficiencies, the modeling, the simplicity of the modeling, all that stuff, the great forms, that's one of those points where you're talking about the significant forms. Look how he's empowered these separate forms and hasn't sat around and noodled whole areas. There's a kind of a visual order approach to this, the great forms to the minor forms, right? And most good painters aren't doing minor forms at any point, right? I mean, I'm talking about counts of little things that make up the individual, right? That's that kind of a realism model, but you see a little bit more of that suggested, at least, or I feel it in my own mind in looking at Bouguereau, and I don't have one in front of me to compare, so I'm sorry I can't talk to you more about that here, but there's a portrait by him. Again, this will be a pencil portrait, and that's of Manet, I guess. But this is very much what you find Ang doing with pencil, but look how accurate this thing looks, and by the way, all these are searching. Every drawing that I love is a searching drawing. I'm not a big fan of drawings as art. By the way, despite having spoken as I have about Lillian Westcott Hale's magical charcoals, but Look at this, the great sense of proportions. The guy has actually got a very good 2D eye. He's great at the contour. He's great at form. Degas just got it all going, and he's always got it going. There are other guys you can talk about at different points. Menzel and other people like that are very interesting to consider. Sometime I should look at those. I'm just talking about guys and the larger ideas about what good draftsmanship is. The ones at the top are interesting because you can see how they just get in and get out. They have these very expressive characters, and they're just doing essential things. And he's not doing a bit more. He's not trying to noodle them up in any fine way or anything like that. The one on the right is more developed, but you can see in every one of these figures, it's just the essential thing. It's the essential gesture. It's the essential, the big shadow side, light side. Each one of these is that primarily. It's just like one after the other of these broadly expressed characters whose primary mission is to be doing the gesture well. As you can see, his proportions all look good. But this is Daumier, and he's never been one of my favorite draftsmen, but you can understand the idea of a draftsman's job is to really express the gesture, to really get the figures to talk gesturally. These have values too, and yet they aren't, but they're still not. I don't think they originate even slightly from the mass drawing approach. I should say that more thoughtfully, right, carefully. But this is the Deliqua, one of those where I would tell you he's making this figure up out of his imagination. But I know that he did a ton. I can't tell you I absolutely know that, but some of these shapes look a little preposterous. On the other hand, you can see how it hangs together with unity and all that sort of thing, and is very expressive as a gesture, very, very, very much full of expression. The gestural expression. This is Liberty, presumably Liberty leading the people in one of those timely ones for the days we're in now. The two on the left, though, this is a different form of draftsmanship, and it's the efficiency of this one here. Just a few marks, and he's got a fully expressed form. The mass is there, but it's all in line. But you see the roundness of these figures. You see the gestures of these figures. You see even empathy between the figures. The guy, by the way, nobody brings empathy like he does, I don't think, to the viewer. I mean, you just feel what this guy is feeling for this little kid, and these two little people helping. I mean, like, does draftsmanship need to be capable of expressing that well you might say the emotional state or the personal intent of each of the individual actors? And yet look how simple these ink marks are. And down below the chalk, the red chalk. I mean, look at the simplicity of that. Now that's one of those marks of draftsmanship, in my view. Great draftsmanship it's not required that you noodle. Great draftsmanship is not the same thing as accurate drawing. So, but that's one of those things where think it through for yourself. Don't believe a word I say. I don't really want to argue with anybody about this stuff. It isn't that. You're just taking it from me that this is the way I perceive, and I just showed you a bunch of the drawings. There is something special to be valued. I looked at a bunch of these. I think this is by Seshu here. I looked at a bunch of these Japanese ink drawings. Now, this is mass drawing, but it's still drawing, right? It's a different convention, okay, as it were. So mass drawing. And the one on the left, by the way, is Annigoni, Pietro Annigoni, who is still alive in my lifetime. He's quite a while gone now, but you can see the remarkable expression. In fact, I would suggest, what you're looking at in these paintings is the visual order of the Boston School. The salient, the articulation of stuff that happens in these strong silhouetting areas, that the carefulness of the articulation in these places is not an insignificant thing. You'll see anybody who works with mass has got to recognize that you don't have it. If you have a lot of lostness like this here, you got to be very articulate in those kinds of places there, or where everything's happened to meet dark meets light and all that stuff. You've got to really get those things. You got to really get them right. A good draftsman does it, I would say, it's not I almost use the word instinctively, but you have to train yourself to have those instincts, right? And then it's instinctive, right? But the idea in mass drawing is just a little bit different. It's a blob and a readable player. So it's effect-based drawing. I'm only meaning to say that to you, that you can still have draftsmanship. The efficiencies, getting to the point, nice articulation of form, in this case, articulation of light as well, and so on. And of course, values is a thing, because you're talking about, say, the great value here, then the darkest darks dancing around through here in a middle tone game, playing through the whole painting. Those are, what shall we say, that's the stuff of this kind of painting that isn't part as much of, we don't think of them as much in the previous kinds of drawings. You can start talking about these Degas. This is not primarily mass-based drawing. This is line drawing into form. So, but I don't know. That's what I consider really great draftsmanship, and those are the points that that make it up. It has to do with efficiency. It has to do with articulation as a expression of significant things. Getting in, getting out. I didn't mention, maybe I did mention, the idea of being full of the life. They will. A good draftsman's work feels alive as a simple gesture. You feel the fullness of the form. You feel the expression is alive. So there's this idea of the life that's always there. A lot of, don't ever underestimate how important the fullness of a curve like that is for the life. If you make that into a stick, you'll take some of the life out of this figure. Now, if you don't get the fullness of this shape over here, this double shape, if you don't get the fullness of that, but you can see the importance of that great hump there, the fullness, never mind the forms and all that stuff. So, yeah. So these are right up there in what I would call my pantheon. I don't, for some reason, I understand why he's considered a good draftsman, and his search, this evident search to find the figures and to find a grouping. This isn't intended to be a pretty drawing, and it's going to have some doubtful things in it. Not that this is particularly that way, but that's in the nature of a searching drawing. So don't underestimate the painter's work, draftsman's work, because of that. But keep looking at these guys and decide for yourself. Say, look at Raphael's. What's his greatest drawing? What's Leonardo's greatest drawing? Single drawing. And you might do that. And again, I'll just leave you with that idea that it's just so worth your time to look at and find the top 10, top 20 drawings of all time, and then improve your understanding. Okay, so the drawings won't look labored. They will be plausible and truthful. Okay, well, that conversation is kind of a big one, plausible and truthful. Because if you're making one up out of your head, that's where the plausibility comes in. The figure has to look plausible. The proportions have to look plausible. If you make the eyes too high, that's going to look funny. Now, that's a different thing from truthful. But when you get down to where Degas is drawing from life, or Rubens, when you're seeing a guy draw from life, here, these two guys in particular, Degas and Ang, then truthfulness begins to be a bigger thing. These aren't just generally so. This guy is very articulate. He really is trying to nail, like you see the line here, points that are plumb. When things plumb, he's on it, right? That's just good draftsmanship. Plumb is this huge thing. Things that line up need to be definitely lining up. Of course, there's way more to all those things, but this is not a generalization. This is an articulation of the specifics of what you see in front of you. It's only general in the sense of not being picked on in little ways, but in every other way it's broad. So this is for example, there may be some littleness to certain forms in through the shoulder here that he's not going to do right now. He's got this great form and that clavicle, and he's got, but you can see he's got major, 1, 2, 3 major forms here. Could he go inside there and find other bones and do other things, that are possibly showing on this figure? Yeah. But you see his orientation around majors, just these guys that are really important ones. He knows how to put his time into that until it becomes instinctual. He just knows where the pay dirt is, right? So draftsmanship in that sense means, just long drawing, just draw a lot. And you'll find yourself drawing toward efficiencies. You'll start eliminating stuff. And then you'll find, of course, the great painters don't put in junk. For most, realism begins to do that. Trompe really does that. Fool the eye realism does that. But that's where you're bump counting your way down a figure. This is a different category of animal. This is painting from the outside in. It's from the greater to the minor, including the great forms and the major points of articulation, the ones that have that play to your eye before and above other things. So yeah, I think I've done a long time. Oh, gee, okay. How do some of you guys love it? I know that. Let's see if I've missed any points, other points here. Yeah. We said about significant form, by the way, it was said about Baudry that he understood the significant line, thus significant line. That's one for you to think about. I can't remember who said that about him, but it's another painter of his time, of the times who knew what he's talking about. Yeah, he's okay. So those, yeah, this grace and beauty question, that's an interesting one. But notice all these guys. These pictures have that, don't they? Each one of these things has that sense of grace. Look at that. That's remarkable, isn't it? That's why I'm saying if you're setting a paradigm for yourself when you talk the way I'm talking here. So I expect drawings to have a sense of grace. Look at these. There's a rightness in their relationships, a unity in their relationships, their interplay. But inherently, that might be said to be grace. Follow that idea, though. Keep following it up, the grace and beauty idea. So it's not just grace and beauty. I mean, like the idea of unity, how a thing hangs together. There's a way in which it does it that's just remarkable. It's beautiful, right? These forms, the interplay of form, is a magical thing to us as humans, right? And so, and to whatever extent he's painting from life, the interplay of dark shapes into each other, that whole thing is his own abstraction, his own interests, and all that sort of thing. Those things have a need to be seen together for you to find that grace, to find that it's in the interplay, right? That all those things happen. It's in the interplay, not the accuracy it's in not simply the accuracy by copying, but in the grasping of how this line over here plays to this line over here. When you grasp that in your mind, and you get that unity, it's where Degas and his memory kicks in. When you have that in your mind, you're going to do a very much better drawing than when you just copy, and measure. Do you follow me? I think often of Rodin as the model of this other way of working, the live line, so the Sargent line, or as Tarble says, if he painted, he would paint like us, at the Boston School, about Rodin. But yeah, just the magical interplay, this whole discussion of what this is doing, picking off this, or how this thing here picks up and rides this. I mean, we're talking about all kinds of things that aren't happening by measuring. They're happening by you seeing them, you recognizing the beauty and chasing it down. I find that that's what draftsmen are doing, that they recognize essential beauties, that stuff that's worthy of the time they're putting in, and or worthy of being presented to you. They're finding it and talking about it, getting right to the point, and having that conversation. So it has to do with form, it has to do with shape, it has everything you can think of. So grace and beauty, that's a fascinating question. And again, you could think poetry and music. So I'm out of here. This is way long. Thank you all. Thank you for your donations. Thank you for your comments. Hope you're good with what I was doing there, David, to borrow you into a discussion, sort of a corrective discussion of others. Anyway, but thank you for liking, thank you for sharing and subscribing, and keep it coming. In the meantime, what is draftsmanship? Huh? What is this thing? Wonderful. All right, guys, take care. See you next time.